This week on MS Refresh, Microsoft Teams turns 5 years old, and Redmond drops some new features and dates to support hybrid work, along with their 2022 Work Trend Index. All that and more. Subscribe to stay in the know. This is the MS Refresh Show. Hi there, and welcome to the Matt and Sean 365 Refresh Show. This is episode 56 for the work week of March 21st, 2022. Coming to you from the East Coast, my name is Matt Wade.
And from the West Coast of the United States, I'm Sean Bugler.
Hello, Sean. What's good, bud?
Not too much. I'm just kind of chipping away. I'm taking a really interesting course right now that I thought you would appreciate. It is the Beatles after the Beatles. So it's an entire course that's built around the concept of the Beatles after they broke up and like following them down their kind of trajectories post Beatles. It's my last elective that somehow slipped by.
This sounds like a class a professor put together on their last year before retirement, that they're just doing that class they've always wanted to do for the sake of their own satisfaction.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it feels, because you can really tell when somebody builds, and this is true in any space. You can tell when somebody's passionate about something.
Yeah, sure.
Because it tends to be engaging, it tends to be very focused, and all of those things are true, which makes the rest of this this collegiate experience very frustrating. Because you're like, why couldn't people care about this kind of thing in spaces where we all have to take like a math class? Can I get somebody who cares this much about calculus?
So when I was in Amsterdam, I stayed at a hotel that was right down the street from the Hilton, which my girlfriend and I would stop at because they had a good hotel bar. It was the hotel that people were staying at for the conference, but there weren't any rooms left by the time we booked. And it turned out that was the Hilton that Harrison and Yoko Ono had stayed at for it was for a matter of weeks. I think it was like a while, and they actually had like a whole museum display in the main lobby. It was off to the side, but it was like a dedicated museum layout. This is in a city where Van Gogh is the museum to see, right? But it was pretty cool how dedicated the Hilton company was, and especially that local branch hotel was to pointing out the history they had with the
claim
Beatles.
To fame. Yeah. Take it and run with it. Lennon and Ono, just for the sake of anybody who
comments
about this later.
Yeah. John, no, that's not it.
Normally in a conversation, I just kind of go like, "Hey, I know what you mean."
Yeah, I know.
I'm realizing now there are people watching.
Yes.
Well, it's an exciting episode where we're not doing things. I don't need to tell you, Matt. I'll tell you. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. Last week, Microsoft published a new blog. Not just Microsoft, but our very own Nicole Herskowitz, vice president of the Microsoft team, published some really interesting stuff about kind of where Teams is going in celebration of their 5-year anniversary, where they are and where they're going. We thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about some of those announcements and what they mean, well, for us. Matt, you had a chance to read some over the blog. What was your general takeaway from this? And obviously we'll drop into the show notes for everybody to take a look at as well.
Yeah, actually, so already it should be in the video description. So there are going to be links to the blog post from Microsoft on the general hybrid work, the Microsoft Teams turns 5 blog post. There are a couple others, the work index for 2022. That's in there, along with a few of the other key blog posts that we'll be referencing tonight. They're also already in the show notes. So I think big picture wise, notable was a couple metrics that popped out of there. First off was 270 million Teams users. They did not define that, so I'm assuming that must be MAU. That has to be monthly active users, because I think the last publicly reported daily active usage of Teams was 150 million. 270 is a way big jump from 150. There's also a 38% of hybrid employees saying that their biggest challenge is knowing when and why to come into the office. I can relate to that. So it's one of those things where if you work with a team of 5, 10, 15 people, and a third of them or 2/3 of them are out all the time, or it's a varying schedule, if you don't have that really well defined, What's the point of coming in if you can't collaborate in person? What's the value of the in-person experience? And then they talked about a lot of feature sets. Some of them are reasonably new. Some of them are sort of just updating the roadmap and identifying how these things live in context with other feature sets. There are a couple that were just re-announcements of the same stuff we've been hearing about for a very long time.
What? That doesn't sound like Microsoft double dipping on the announcements.
And then a lot of the references will say second quarter 2022, even though most of these items are actually due in April 2022. Now, I realize that is technically correct, but they're obviously trying to evergreen the blog post so that if things get pushed to, it will not be allowed to go past June, right? Like, so most of these items do have specific items in the roadmap. Some don't, though, and that's kind of scary considering some of the visibility of these things, but yeah, so that was a big picture. Some of the metrics I thought were interesting. Most of the percentage numbers you'll see were coming from that hybrid work index, which once again, I mean, it's interesting. I still think they kind of cherry pick the numbers, and the numbers aren't really a great technical representation of how things are so much as they make for good quotes. But I thought that 38% of hybrid employees thing was kind of notable.
Yeah, I was in a meeting just this morning with leadership in my organization, starting to have this conversation around what a true return feels like. And if for those of you who've been watching the show for quite some time, you know that mine and a lot of other organizations have kind of just waited. Well, lots of organizations have kind of done the stop-start of like, we're coming back, just kidding. We're coming back, just kidding. Maybe a little bit. Whereas a lot of organizations like mine have just kind of taken a pure wait and see it approach of we would rather be late to the party than to be the one trying to blaze the trail. And I think it's telling, this may be telling from a cultural standpoint, I'm not entirely sure, that the dam seems to have burst, so to speak. But yeah, I don't know what would make me want to go in if I have a choice. Like I think for the most part, I can get everything done without having to see people. And I do use the word having deliberately. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, but I think that does speak to the technology has to rise to meet that moment. And I think that that's a really good way to bridge us over into some of these new options that Microsoft has introduced. As Matt was saying, we talked about a lot of the challenges or a lot of the things that Microsoft is stepping up to the plate on with respect to Teams, but Outlook is a part of this conversation as well. So Microsoft, Nicole Horskowitz in the blog post announced that Outlook is picking up this brand new, never before seen, definitely not a feature borrowed from Google Calendar that will allow people to RSVP to a meeting. Historically, we've been able to say, yes, I'm coming to a meeting. I'll think about it. And no. But what we're seeing here is we'll have the ability to say not just yes, but yes, I will be there virtually, or yes, I will be there in person. And I think this is great. I think I said a couple of episodes ago, it might have been before the show, I don't know. We talk a lot before we go live, so I never know what actually makes it to air. But I was saying this is something I would have liked to see Microsoft borrow, be inspired by from Google. But to that end, Matt, is this the format? Should this have been a flyout? Because you can see here, like it looks like you have to hover over yes, and then you get to see yes, virtually or in person.
So I'm assuming that I think that this is a bad UI. I think that this is going to entice people to not use it because it's not going to be super obvious that they should, or why take the extra effort for the flyout. The yes menu flies out and I'm assuming that's 3 options and not a title and 2 options. Just yes in general.
You can just choose not to say virtually or in person. You can just say yes. And
yeah, I'm not thrilled with it because I think people are going to easily skip over it and not consider it. Now, this is in OA. I'm still not entirely sure how it's going to work, in the desktop apps or how well that's going to integrate. I mean, the Windows app is notoriously bad for taking Outlook updates that come to OA first. When is it going to come to Teams? And I just want an option. I don't even want these ones. I just want one that says no, but I'm leaving on my calendar just in case.
No,
that's
but I'm now
way
going
more
to use
useful
this.
than maybe.
It's no, but I'm keeping this on my calendar so nobody books over it. So now
No. That's not what I'm trying to say.
protected time. That's what
No.
I'm saying. I want that option.
Yeah, that's fair too. Well, then just make, a deep work, appointment for yourself.
Nobody
No,
respects
I
those.
mean the oh no, if something else is a conflict. If I say no on something, it's gone. I can't see it on my calendar anymore. I forget that it exists. I would like that other thing to be like, hey, don't forget this exists if you happen to be able to make it.
Yeah. Now, what I would have liked to see, and there's still time, Microsoft, what I would have liked to have potentially seen is, as opposed to yes, maybe no, and yes, be a flyout, either make all choices at the top level. So yes, virtually, yes, in person, maybe no, or something like that. The alternative might have been to like inset it within the menu. So like yes, as like the high level, and then below, but just kind of indented just a little bit, virtually, in person, maybe no. But having it a flyout is inherently not a good experience, particularly for users. A lot of my users are operating on tablets now, using the web browser, not using the mobile apps. And I just think flyouts are an outdated user experience.
Yeah. And this would only add 2 options really to that list of 3. And I realize that a list needs to be as short as it possibly can for the to minimize the amount of choice efforts that your brain has to go through. But I feel like, especially if you're right, if you indent those underneath the yes, that would make it pretty clear as to what you're asking.
Yeah. And this indentation is just, it gives the user too much leeway to ignore it, which if this is going to be something that we implement in an organization, I'd like it to be something that the user has to kind of lean into, or that organizationally we can decide even shows up at all.
Yep.
I don't know.
Totally
but it
agree.
is interesting. I'm glad to see them introducing more of these hybrid friendly features. I hope that we continue to see more of that. And in fact, funny enough, looks like we've got Matt, you want to take this one?
Yes, let's grab. Okay, so we've got companion device experiences for team rooms. So I don't talk team rooms very often because team rooms I feel like are a pretty niche thing. But it seems like the numbers, at least based on the blog post, something like 80 million Teams devices being used. Not necessarily Teams rooms, but like that's a lot of devices that are out there. So they're going to be pushing now for you walk into a Teams enabled room and you have your personal device. It will automatically, when you join that meeting that's already ongoing in the room, turn off all of your audio so you won't get any feedback. So it'll protect you from yourself, essentially. Video is going to be your video if you are on the your laptop. Let's say you're sitting at your desk, or sorry, at the table, like in a conference room, and you're in the meeting through that conference room. Teams enabled or Teams room enabled device. It's going to pull you out of the gallery view that's going to be displayed on that screen, which is smart. Like, why show the person that's already in the room to everybody else? I think, which is a good idea. And then the intelligent speakers, so the ability for somebody to be identified for captions and transcript within a room using one of those devices, microphone that would be in the room, will now be expanding to non-US customers. And this is the first time I saw referenced in at least a blog post. I'm sure the documentation has it, but again, I've never really had to look into it myself. So that voice attribution, I just kind of thought that, based on past meetings you've been in on your own device where you are obviously the person on that device, it's not really any sort of effort the computer's going through to identify you because you're logged in from your account on your laptop or whatever from whatever. But apparently you do have to do a quick voice memo run for the system to understand and identify your voice, which is the first time I've seen that referenced. And basically they had a little statement that that's something that, doesn't get saved, and, your privacy is your privacy, all that kind of thing. So I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting, and I'm glad to see that, because I think that is, per what we were just talking about a second ago, one of the biggest struggles with the hybrid experience as we start to think about what meetings look like is, let's say 5 out of 10 people are there in person in the room. How do you make that a co-equal experience for the people at home? How do you not make them feel like
left out?
Yeah, third-class citizens.
Oh yeah.
And that's a huge problem. So figuring out ways to make Teams a non-painful solution is going to be really, really important, because it's not just about elevating the people who are remote into a first-class position, but it's also about not irritating the ever living daylights out of the people who are there in person, because they're inheriting a kind of an IT role. They're inheriting a producer role that nobody wants.
Yep.
You know, it should be just plug and play. And the closer we can get to that with things like this, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I didn't know about the voice memo thing to like, do you think that, do they have you like read a script or something?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was. I'll have to look at the
It's like when you're setting up the Siri and you have to say like, you know, hey, what's the weather?
yeah, essentially. Yeah, I'll look for where that reference was. Oh, here, it's all right. So intelligent speakers use Microsoft voice recognition technology in Teams to attribute who's speaking and apply their name to the meeting transcript. After a quick voice enrollment in Teams, user voice profiles are securely stored in the customer tenant of the Microsoft Office 365 Cloud, which is GDPR and EUDB compliant. So basically, you need to say something for us. We keep it in a system someplace, and it's going to be deletable if you need it to be deletable at the time.
And it sounds like that's not specific to the meeting, that's once you've identified yourself within the tenant, that's held on to.
It would cross the all of your experiences, I assume.
As long as you're signed in.
That's correct.
The next thing that we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about, which is something that we continue to hear a lot about, but we're finally starting to see it creep towards launch, the new front row Teams layout experience. So the idea here is that when you're in a meeting, you'll be able to have, in fact, I think this launched already, didn't this? This launched in January.
Yeah, I think this was out in January.
Yeah, this shows how often I work in Teams rooms. But the idea here is a layout that meets the user if you're using what Microsoft's recommended configuration is for a Teams room, which is screens above, upset a little bit, and then you've got your camera dead set below the screens. The idea here is that the layout will bring the virtual users down into that bottom row, elevate the content above, and then, of course, depending on whether you're configured for a single or a dual screen layout, you'll see, you know, contacts, chat, etc. But I like this, and Matt, you and I were talking about this before we went live, but I wanted this experience for the top row so that I can look at my camera. It's almost the exact inverse of this. And we speculated, it's been a while since I've truly used Teams. We speculated that this may be a feature that exists already, and I just haven't seen it. So if anybody knows for sure, because between Matt and I, neither of us can say confidently, whether there's kind of this inverse front row where you can have the pictures dead set center so I can look at you while I'm looking at the camera, that would be great. Shout it out in the comments. But I like this. I like this idea of configurable situation specific layouts. I think that they enhance the experience. I think that they go a little bit further in line with what we were talking about earlier of elevating the experience of the people who are not there without detracting from the experience of those who are. You know, because otherwise you're sandbagging the experience for everybody. Let's see here. That's all I've got. One other thing that I'll go ahead and make mention of here is that this front row layout is available for both GCC and GCC High. No word about DoD, although, of course, hopefully that means they're just around the corner here. Because we usually, once they get to GCC High, there's almost no reason it doesn't get to DoD unless there's an internet issue.
There's still a delay between GCC High and DoD, but it's not usually as wide as going from commercial to GCC High.
Yeah, well, it becomes much more likely a question of when, not if.
Yeah, agreed.
Fingers crossed.
So in addition to that, some general meetings features updates. Let's scroll down here to see if I can grab the screenshot that they were showing. So a number of PowerPoint items coming out as well. So the PowerPoint Studio and the PowerPoint Cameo. So Studio is the ability to record yourself. Cameo is the ability to put your camera or your video on slides and also, you know, drop your background, things like that. Now they're going to be able to be done together. The sort of intent here, if you read through, sounds like it's a lot more for asynchronous meetings where people on different sides of the world might be needing to meet. So I would come in and I would record myself with my slides and then press play on those slides for the meeting. And then somebody else, say in the asynchronous version, would have the slides and be able to press, forward on the slide and see me present on the topic I was going to present on. So it wouldn't actually be live, no, interactivity or questions, that kind of thing. Speaker Coach coming to Teams as well. If you've never used Speaker Coach in PowerPoint, it started out in the PowerPoint on the web experience. I think it's made it to desktop now, but essentially will tell you that, if you're using Speaker Coach and you're me, that you speak too fast, that you don't breathe as frequently as you should, that you use the same words over and over, that you might say words that are not inclusive. And then there was something else that is useful in this one that they specifically called out. I'm trying to remember. Oh, to notify if you're interrupting somebody and to remind you to check in with your audience, to say if there's any questions, that kind of thing. So that's super useful. And then there were a couple other things. First was language interpretation. So you can actually have a live interpreter in your meetings. And while I totally see the use case for this is just now going to muddle up even further the meetings options page. So like CART transcription or captions came out recently, which added that many more options to the meetings options when it's something that almost nobody probably uses unless you actually have a human that's going to be doing that. And like, that's a very specific niche use case. Same with this one. And then Whiteboard. So there are going to be 50 new templates for Microsoft Whiteboard. The ability to collaborate with external participants, that's due in April. And then of course the revamped Windows Whiteboard app, which the roadmap says was due in February, and it has not been updated since, and it's now March 21st. But yeah, so I think the ability to collaborate with external participants for Whiteboard and Teams meetings is going to be a big one.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's going to be awesome. I did not know that Speaker Coach, I don't know if this is new functionality or if this was part of the base one as well, would tell you if you were interrupting somebody.
I don't know. I think that might be new, actually.
I don't think I've heard that one before. So
you know what? That's got to be new because Speaker Coach was specific to you doing a practice presentation of your slides. Yes. So it has to be new. Yeah,
that's got to be new. But that's fascinating. And honestly, a really clever thing to do because you can absolutely figure out crosstalk.
Yeah.
You could absolutely figure out there's the sustained, sound coming from one microphone and you've just kind of steamrolled in there. I would wonder how gentle it is. Is it too gentle? Like that's got to be a touchy dance from a UI perspective.
Well, plus you can't get over the awkwardness of, this is one thing that, and I even push it really hard in the my clients with larger, let's say, management chains. It's awkward when you ask an open-ended question in a meeting of more than like 5 people. Just don't do it. Or ask them to do it. Ask them to respond in the chat or to use the hand raise. But you have to set the expectations at the beginning if you're ever going to use hand raise, because it has to be a societal contract within that meeting, right? And when 2 or 3 people want to jump in a meeting of 40, and you're trying to be transparent and open and all that kind of great synergistic stuff, you're just asking for everybody to hop on top of each other, and like this thing would never stop that. Right?
No.
We need the thing that would stop that. That's the problem that we all have is you ask a question and, hey, does anybody have any suggestions on X? And everybody pauses because they're trying to be polite to let everybody else jump in first. And they all wait that same length of time and then all jump in at the same time.
Clippy jumps on and it says, it looks like you just asked an open-ended question to 40 people.
Right. Did you mean to step on your boss's toes?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really great opportunities there. And I like that Microsoft is broaching that with something I think we can all agree is hard, which is the interperson communication dynamic, because I think it's a lot easier. Matt, this is true for you and I. Like when we first started doing the show, it's really hard not to talk over each other because we lose some of those visual cues, those physical cues of I'm about to go. Whether it's like a hand starting to move or something, like little kind of micro cues. I like that we're starting to see technology try to bridge that divide in a way that we have ultimately been unable to do, except at the cultural level of organizations implementing things like raise your hand. All of those things are not natural to do digitally.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Matt, I want to put you into a state of mind. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're going to a conference. You're going to be away from the office and you want to stay connected, but you don't necessarily want to have to carry a work phone, but you're not necessarily keen on, the kind of the dual calling experience of Teams currently. Because, you get a Teams call and it's the app comes up and, you've got to unlock the phone so that the app can open up. You can't just answer the call. There's a lot of kind of barriers in the way. What if I were to tell you that Microsoft was its own cellular carrier?
Ooh.
That's not what I'm telling you, but imagine
not. But
so in the blog post here, Microsoft goes on to explain this new Operator Connect mobile experience that they've partnered up with a number of telecom operators, including BT, Rogers, Swisscom, Telia, and Verizon. So they're covering kind of marquee markets in the United States and Europe. The idea here is that your work can issue you a phone number that is simultaneously your work desk number, but is also your team's team number. So that when somebody calls you, they're calling you, your phone rings like a regular phone call, but for everybody else that's involved, it could be just ultimately a Teams experience. That's really cool. And when you think about how much work has to go into this, it's no wonder nobody's tried to do this before, because the amount of legwork to create that kind of connection is staggering. Matt, what do you think about this? Is this going to be useful to you personally?
Not me personally, no. At least not in the near term. But I definitely see the value here. And I think, so I am not a PSTN, PTSN, whatever the telephony acronym is. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a collaboration guy. But I do understand the value of having a desk phone, which is super annoying, or a Teams enabled desk phone, which I think is what this is going to require. I don't know if it's going to support having a regular telephone that rings when a phone number is called. I think this is for organizations that have already jumped on the concept of having Teams enabled devices for telephones, where you have that phone number and can pick up wherever. But your cell phone, your mobile device, wouldn't necessarily have a separate phone number. So if somebody calls it, it'll still come up. And there's a link in the show notes that covers more detail on this. And again, this is outside of my technical expertise, but it sounded like it was super useful too, because it will go from data to cellular for calling, depending on the situation you're in. And if you're on your phone and you're talking to somebody, via, I'll say like a phone call, you can send that over to your laptop if you want to, or bring 2 or 3 other people in and have a video call instead. And have, that make a phone call into a conference. So definitely use cases I can see, because there really should be no reason that somebody has 2 phone numbers any longer. Like there doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be a thing any longer.
I'll push back on you because my number is my number. And I don't want to.
That's going to be the question. The question is going to be, no, but seriously though, like let's say it's a BYOD organization, and you have your own cell phone and they want to use that, like that's going to be difficult. And
this is where dual SIM comes into play.
Yeah, right. And some phones don't support that, right? It's going to be a question. I'm sure that's going to be a hurdle for people to get over.
Absolutely. But, I think the big takeaway is the one you hit on, which is that ultimately you're going to be able to have a phone number that is your team's phone number that is also just your mobile device's actual phone number. So you'll be able to receive those Teams calls, just as we're seeing here in the little graphic. You're calling Ed when it's a Teams call, but your phone is just ringing like a regular phone call. Which is awesome. Speaking of Teams and connecting people.
Yeah. Hey, guess what? Shared channels are coming.
What? Whoa. Shared channels?
Who would have thought? We covered this back in episode 53, I think it was, 54. Let me double check. Yes. Nothing new. They're just double dipping on this one. It's still due this month for preview. It is item number 70766. On the roadmap. If you look at some of the other ones that are out there, like the language interpretation is 87.547, and the whiteboard templates and collaborating with external participants is, or let's say the whiteboard, the revamped app is 82094. You'll notice that there are a lot of numbers between those and 70766, and that's because that item is so old. But we spent a bunch of time on this 2 episodes ago. If you want to learn more about Teams Connect and those shared channel concepts, it's the same thing. Teams Connect is just the brand name for shared channels. We talked about what those, how those are going to work, what to expect, and you can go back a couple videos to check those out.
I don't know what more we could possibly say about Teams Connect that we have not over the last year.
It's here. That's what that's what we can say that we haven't said yet.
So on that note, speaking of almost here, last week we got a question about loop components. We got a question about when we expected the loop desktop app to come to life and be a thing. But the other question was, where else would we start to see it show up? And you and I shared the sentiment that Outlook felt like the natural next step for it to plug into. It was a part of all their demos. It was clear the functionality existed. It just hadn't made the jump yet. And sure enough, in the blog post, Nicole Herskowitz announces that loop components in Outlook Mail are on the way, but it's always a but. You have to be signed up as an Office Insider. So that link is, if you want to sign up as an Office Insider, is going to be in the blog post, which is already in the show notes if you want to check it out below. But yeah, you're going to be able to tap into all these great interactive experiences that we've already seen available in the Teams chat experience, which is great. I think that the struggle continues to be, and we got the question a couple shows ago of why aren't we talking about Loop more? And I was pretty candid about it. Despite it having launched months ago, it still has not been in front of me in a useful capacity at all. But this would change that. It being in Outlook would change my perspective on that, because now it's something where I'm sending emails constantly. It would be really great to be able to have that live note, especially we talked about just earlier, my organization is making a lot of big policy changes. So imagine being able to send an email that is the draft that our executive director is going to send out. But to be able to go back and forth on that in the email itself without having to have a separate document outside of that conversation.
So I am slightly disappointed by this, because I would really like loop components in Teams first, in channels. And Outlook can die at slow death unceremoniously and be left behind. But this is still an improvement. One other complaint about this demo is that the two loop components that are not yet available are the task list and the voting table. And those are the two that they use in all of the freaking video demos.
As if the most compelling use cases.
As if they exist, and they don't exist yet. You can't do it. Now, the one thing I don't really understand with this, so, I'm going to sound, I should probably not even admit that I know I've heard of Office Insiders. I've never signed up for it. I've never needed to. I just did. Well, I just did. It didn't even download a new version of Outlook for me. Now I'm on my Mac, but how do I get this in the browser when the Insider program is specific to the desktop apps, and you have to do it at the local level and indicate that you want the Insider's beta?
Yeah. So my understanding of this would be that this is something that you as a personal individual can sign up for your desktop one. But if you want it enabled organizationally, you have to be opted into it by an admin. Because if you go into this is based purely on my experience dealing with rollouts previously, is within an org, typically you've got kind of the safe track, which is everybody gets everything all at the same time when Microsoft thinks it's good and ready and baked. Then there's on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is give everybody everything as soon as you possibly can.
Right.
And then the middle of that is give these select people everything as soon as you can, but everything else, give it to us when it's all well and goody and ready and baked. So that would be my presumption, is that there's a little bit of a missed connection with respect to what this actually means. Because I mean, they're showing it in the web experience.
Yeah.
Unless this is that new fancy Outlook
Well,
1.
so it's weird because I think this is a GIF, so I can't stop it. But on the right side, when you see the side-by-side Teams Outlook, I'm pretty sure the right side, this one right here, is the new Outlook 1 in
I think you're right.
Windows Desktop.
But that's the web.
Yeah, this is the web version right here. But this is going to be confusing too because loop components are stored in OneDrive. And if your organization doesn't have external sharing turned on in OneDrive, which plenty of them do not allow OneDrive sharing externally, but they do allow SharePoint and Teams because OneDrive is just such a pain in the butt to manage from a lifecycle standpoint. So if you email somebody with a loop component and you don't have external sharing turned on and it's to an outside person, that recipient is SOL. I would assume. I would bet my next paycheck that they're going to be SOL because it's all OneDrive content. So I guess we'll see what happens because I kind of doubt that these things are going to be like embedded somehow into the email itself.
Once again, Microsoft constantly testing the boundary of, are you sure you want to disable that?
Testing the boundary of what else can we store on OneDrive?
Whiteboard, loop components,
email attachments.
It's
never ending.
The sky is the limit.
Now, the one last item that popped up, and
fair.
I mean, there was Viva Insights. I don't really care about Viva. You can check out Viva for all you want. Is you're getting your 3D emoji, Mr. Bugler. You have demanded and you have screamed and you have stomped your feet, and it appears you are getting your 3D emoji in Teams.
Internally, they have undoubtedly called this the Bugler release.
Wow, I love that. That's great. We're gonna make a hashtag out of that, or release the Bugler. One of the other.
Release the Bugler. Nice. I'm glad to see this. It's just such a small dumb thing. Just give me the small dumb thing. Emojis are such a brilliant, clever way to induce another layer of communication, even if organizationally you disagree. It doesn't hurt you for other people to have access to it, and particularly as we continue to hire the next generation of worker, this is how people are talking to each other.
Yeah, totally.
Like business decisions, like emoji.
And if you don't use the skull and you use the laughing emoji, obviously you're just completely out of touch with society.
Completely out of touch. Yeah, likewise, if you're using just the generic smiley face with teeth, that's just weird. Don't do that.
Yeah, why does that even default to that? That's terrible. Somebody on the Windows team needs to be slapped around for that, because if you're just doing a smile, it's a smile. It is not the one with the open face. It's the one on the top right here. It is not this one right here. Although those two are the same. What the hell? Anyway.
But yeah, I think this is great. I think that it is a new layer of business language, whether people like it or not. It has legal context. Like when you export this stuff for like discovery, emojis have to be part of it, because if you do like a thumbs up, that's approval.
All right. But if you give a middle finger up,
also context. Well, there's a lot of really interesting announcements in that. Obviously there's plenty of news that we'll cover next week as we get back into our regular rhythm, but it made sense to talk about everything that's happened, that is happening in the world of Teams, particularly as we step into this newer normal, this hybrid surreal thing that we're all just kind of tumbling towards.
Flying by the seat of our pants.
Matt,
do you want to take you want to take a couple questions?
Great minds.
We do.
Let's see here. We got one before the show. I don't know if you want to tackle that one right up front.
Yeah, why don't we do that? So Mike had asked, he's got a couple comments in here, but I'll kind of take the question here about using Teams to improve communication with external entities. So let me run through. There were a couple specific things in here. No, actually look pretty general. So for Teams externally facing, you have a few options. If your external folks have Teams, that is your best bet for getting the most out of an external experience with Teams. So first off, being able to enable external chatting with those people so they can have one-on-one and group chat across your tenant and their tenant. That is a two-way street. It's a handshake experience. So the two organizations have to agree to do that. But if you work with an organization pretty closely, that can be super handy to be able to just send a chat and not an email. Emails, it's just one of those social constructs these days where, like, to me, an email is like oh my God, I have to take out a book and open it and like do something with it. Like, but a chat is just boop, I can just send a message. I don't have to find out their email, their phone number, or be worried that I have like their personal cell phone number or their personal email, whatever. And you can kind of do that. Second is the ability to pull people in as guests into teams. If an organization has teams, it can be easier, especially with these shared channels now, being able to pull, coming very soon, being able to include people from other teams in your tenant and people outside of your tenant in those shared channels is going to be super big. And when you do that, that's going to affect SharePoint, right? You're going to have to make sure that SharePoint external access is enabled as well. You're going to want to enable Azure B2B collaboration in the Azure side of things to make sure that people can log in as a Microsoft user. But you can also include random people with a random email address. If you want to set it so that you have to use a Microsoft account, that's fine. But I think that it's really useful, but I think it needs to be dedicated. I think that they should be like safe spaces where this is an externally shareable space. Don't host anything here that you don't need. Yeah, I think very, very useful, especially for like, those channel setups could be the kind of thing where you include different vendors for different contracts, and they each have different access to different either channels or files or whatever else. You could even use private channels for that kind of setup. But yeah, I think you have a lot of opportunity there. And there are a lot of really good articles that Microsoft has in the docs.microsoft.com sphere on getting external collaboration and external access, both in SharePoint and Teams set up.
I couldn't have said it any better. I think that the one thing I'll add on to that is that as Microsoft enhances and really brings to the foreground the B2B Microsoft 365 to Microsoft 365 tenant communication, I think that it's just going to get better.
Yep.
And Teams Connect is a really great example of what that experience can be when it's applied appropriately.
Yep. Nope, I agree.
And then, of course, Mike also says, looking forward to your next book. I knew you were going to glaze over that, so I'm going to make sure I throw that out there. Loved the all caps Teams one.
Let's see. The other one that stood out to me here was the SharePoint is not a replacement for your file server. And like, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, SharePoint is a file server effectively. A SharePoint site can hold 25 terabytes. Your organization has X number of terabytes based on the number of people. You can sync all that stuff or not to your, well, not all of it, obviously. Laptop can hold that amount of data. But you are going to have limitations. One thing that we run into a lot is access databases just are not SharePoint friendly, and I don't think they ever will be. I think Microsoft has this really weird relationship with access as to, we're going to kill it. We were going to kill it. We decided not to kill it. We have to not kill it, but we're not going to support storing it in SharePoint. That's for sure. But when you say here, the recommendation, once you get above 100,000 files, like a document library can hold, I want to say 8 million. Yeah, I think it's 8 million files. Could be wrong.
They keep updating it. I feel like over the last 2-3 years, they've really kind of hit the gas on that.
Yeah, it's huge now. So, I mean, is it a place for you to store stuff indefinitely and forever? Probably not, but you shouldn't do that in a shared drive anyway, or a file server. Oh no, see, I'm saying it's more than that. Man, taking my words from 2016.
I thought this was a great
before Teams existed. I'm throwing this out there.
Teams. Okay. No, absolutely. But to that end, if you follow the link, you do speak to a lot of the same things. And this conversation comes back every 3 months in the SharePoint community universe. Steve and I go so far as to say you probably saw the same tweet thread I saw a week ago that was basically this exact same conversation. No, SharePoint's not a one-to-one replacement for your file server, but it solves the same problem of creating a destination for users to get the information you need, plus some. It allows you to, as I used to say a million times a day, it allows you to add context to that content in a way that wasn't possible with file servers. Now, to that end, if the question is, if not SharePoint, then what else? I do want to take this opportunity to flag Azure Files, which is essentially their Microsoft's cloud-based version of a file network share. Uses all the same protocols, SMB, NFS, And so you don't need a VPN. And that's essentially a one-to-one cloud-based file share experience. So I do want to make sure I throw that out there because a lot of people don't know it exists. And for organizations that need to get off the local file share, need to get off premises. Sorry.
I was gonna call it out.
I know. It's once again, it's one of those things where I say it. I'm like, you know what I mean.
Off prem. Just say prem. You'll never be wrong if you say prem.
Need to get off the premises. This Azure Files is a potential solution that is purely lift and shift at that point. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad we got that question.
All right, which one stuck out to you? I realized I just took two.
No, let's just run down the list here. Harriet asked the question, hi. Will we ever get the option to edit a calendar entry and not send to all participants? I would bet money the answer is no.
But there's so many workarounds to this.
Not good ones.
Yeah, good ones.
All right, you
don't put anything in your appointment. Link to a file instead. So update all of your information and your context in a file and update the file and nobody gets the updates about it.
Yeah.
You want to add people to it, forward the appointment to those people. Don't just add them to it. Trust me, I get enough of these complaints on a day-to-day basis that I figured out my way to give people a way to do it.
It's your full-time job. Yeah. So Harriet, those are your best paths forward. But as to whether this is something you should hold your breath for in 2022, no. Find a different horse to bet on. I'm so sorry. I want it too. But the architecture this is built on is not going anywhere anytime soon. Speaking of calendars, Adam asks, quite literally, speaking of calendars, I hate how there are SharePoint events, SharePoint calendars, group calendars, user calendars, and they all have a different experience. They all have different levels of access.
Preach.
I mean, there's not really a question in here except to say we agree. One thing, this is where I'll pull out my soapbox. One thing that absolutely drives me nuts is that group calendars aren't visible to guests. So if you add somebody to a Microsoft 365 group, which does have a calendar object, they can't see that calendar. Even if you were to embed it into the SharePoint site that comes with a Microsoft 365 group, those guests can't see the calendar object. It's the single biggest complaint that I deal with in my organization because we're a very externally collaborative organization. They want to invite these external people, these external stakeholders, these external project managers, and have a common calendar that they can all look at. And outside of Microsoft Teams, outside of Microsoft Lists new calendar view, there's really not a good experience for that. And even that one, per our conversation from last week,
is not good.
It doesn't solve the problem of I want to see it in the context of my calendar so that I can overlay it and blah, blah, blah.
You also can't color code it. I literally had a meeting today with somebody who wanted to do that, which is a completely reasonable expectation. And it's been something that you could do in SharePoint since 2007, at least. And it's just, there's so many half-assed calendar solutions in Microsoft 365 and no good ones. It's like chat solutions in Google's cloud.
Yep, 100%. Microsoft, their version of it is calendars and task lists.
Everything's split up based on the apps they work on or the underlying servers that they work on. They need somebody that just looks at calendars, regardless of the solution that it's coming from or the system that it's coming from. They need to have a calendaring solution that works.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think I said it last time, but I'll say it again. I would love to see them create a modular calendar experience, just like they did with People Cards a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Adam says, my beard is thicker than yours. We need a beard competition. You and I have agreed privately that I would win.
This is 6 days, and I think on his side, that's 6 hours. So
I just, right before we went live, I shaved and then I sneezed, which is always a mistake.
Yep. You should have heard it. Like the sound effect is just like, especially on the good microphone that he has, it's really good.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Top tier stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Other questions that jump to you?
Yeah, there was, well, actually you could probably speak to this mostly.
Did you see that? So Brian says, did you see that Select's Power Automate flows are now being featured in the Teams App Store in a new workflows section? Microsoft is all in on the Power Platform. You better believe they're all
Yeah,
in,
they are.
because that is going to be a huge moneymaker, which is why they're constantly refining the guidance on what needs a license and what doesn't.
Yep. Are you an E5 customer? Damn, we can't upsell you anymore. Wait a minute. Can I introduce you to the Power Platform? It is the most complex, convoluted licensing model that Microsoft has ever created. And that's saying something.
There's a lot of hubbub happening right now in the world of Power Platform licensing because they just updated guidance. The Power Automate team just updated guidance on service accounts. And the gist of it was that if they can identify that an account is a service account, and they didn't go into detail about how they'd be able to figure it out, but I'm sure there are signals.
I'm really
then you have to license all the flows in that account on a per flow license basis, as opposed to getting the premium, power user Power Automate license.
Yeah, right. That's that basically is they're cracking down on multiplexing, right?
That's exactly what they're doing. Yeah. But the problem that you're going to run into there is defining what service accounts are, and two, you're really going to upset the balance of a lot of different things. And a lot of people are pointing at the center of excellence, which has a ton of Power Automate flows built into it.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, are you going to have to license those? And sure, it's $500 per month for, I think they get you like 5 Power Automate flows. But that's still like a couple $1,000s just to launch the center of excellence.
Yeah. You have to decide for yourself what's the value of that workflow, right? If it's running a couple dozen times a month.
And I think that robs organizations of being able to think in a more scrappy, agile manner. I genuinely do. I think that Microsoft, when they tighten down on licensing, you threaten people's creativity to think about what small solutions, because I want to be able to throw a Power Automate flow together that is so simple. That's got, a trigger and 2 actions, and that's it. And I want to solve a problem for that. I don't want to have to, sorry, I get so emotional about this. I don't want to have to think about I've got this great idea for a really simple Power Automate flow. Now I have to figure out where I'm going to get $500 from, which in a government agency, I should have had this idea 12 months ago so I could get it squeezed into the budget.
Correct. Yes, exactly. That is exactly
all that
right.
To say, yes, Brian, I did see that. We talked about Power Automate being featured in the Teams App Store a couple months ago. I'm glad to see it finally hitting out there because I think Power Automate is great. And I think it opens up a lot of potential opportunities as long as Microsoft doesn't crush all of our souls with licensing.
Nerd.
I yield my time.
All right. So a couple other ones that popped up. So Jamie said, be wary of letting external users and teams see whether you're free to chat. That is a very valid thing, which is why I set up a lot of appointments on my calendar to say that I'm in deep work so that I am read. I swear I do that.
I believe you.
So KitKat asked, how do you deal with having to be logged into one Teams org or the other? So if you're doing external, so that is the bane of many Teams users' existence, having to go up to your Me menu up in the top right of Teams and jump between the organizations, which is especially annoying if you get meeting appointments from that tenant, because then it'll ask you to switch the org first. And I have noticed in some instances that it will just get spun or start spinning on the actual authentication. However, that shared channels or Teams Connect experience is going to let you avoid all of that by showing you those channels right in the tenant that you're in, which will be a nice improvement. Jimmy also pointed out you can sync access to Dataverse, but that requires work.
It also requires an in-house person who can speak to, it does speak to licensing, who can speak to access, which we've been slowly trying to crush.
Jimmy also asked, do you schedule meetings on Teams channel? I see the use case. I love telling people they should, but I do not see channel meetings happening very frequently, especially because it's still sort of unpredictable as to whether or not somebody gets an invitation for it, depending on how old the team is, which is unacceptable, but it's no bueno.
And also just kind of the noise that it creates. I think that ends up becoming a problem, particularly as the organizations get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
We discovered in one of our tenants that if you schedule a channel meeting, and then decide that, oops, I didn't mean to put that there, or you chose the channel by mistake somehow, you can delete the comment or the post in the channel. But if you decide to cancel the meeting first and then try to delete it, You can't delete it from the user end, from the admin side, from the like e-discovery, all that side. It's literally permanent. And we've run into a couple people who are like, whoa, what do you mean all that stuff that I put there is permanent? And it's like, and I can't stop somebody from scheduling a channel meeting in a team. It's a weird little quirk that I never would have expected somebody would step on. But now in the last 2 months, like 3 people have done it in a very, high visibility team, and there's no way to fix it, no way to recover from it. And it's just insanity.
Welcome to Teams Purgatory.
Right, exactly. So,
and then per the question you had pulled up just a moment ago, I do want to make sure I echo something that Jamie says here, which is use Teams for the web, and then you can leverage either Chrome or Edge browser profiles to switch between tenants. Couldn't co-sign that more, because that's just is really the only way like people like you and I survive.
Oh yeah, I have profile. I must have a dozen profiles in my Chrome and maybe Edge experience.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to echo something we talked about. I want to say last week that Microsoft did announce on the roadmap that coming in early April, starting to roll out, Microsoft is rolling the ability to switch between multiple accounts in Office web apps, which presumably will include Teams, which means that you could feasibly, as of next month, start to get away with one browser profile and switching between multiple tenants using the, what did you call it? The me menu?
Yeah, we couldn't, when I was working on the Office, the For Dummies book, the editor was very specific about this thing has to have a name. What is it called? And I'm like, Microsoft doesn't call things by names anymore. Like they're
the hell they don't.
Well, they're writing
publicly.
Their style guide specifically will say like, click,
stop giving.
Don't click the button. They'll say click the 3 dots or click your face, right? Like they won't say open up the X menu. We couldn't come up with a better term for it, so we went with me.
I liked it. Yeah, the me menu. That's right up there with the waffle.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
I didn't come up with that. I'd like to say I did, but I did not. All right, so I think that's pretty good on where we are on questions. I'm going to throw out a couple calls to action here if anybody's interested. If you want to know a little bit more about Microsoft Loop, I'm going to be presenting at Teams Nation on Wednesday. So Teams Nation is it's actually a monthly, I think, user group thing for based out of Europe, but they have at least twice a year a very large Teams and Microsoft 365 online conference. It's completely free. I think it's literally, no, it's teamsnation.online. The link is in the show notes right now, so you can feel free to sign up. Again, it is free. And then I'm going to be talking Teams and Loop at the Microsoft 365 conference in Las Vegas in early April. If anybody is interested in joining that, there's again a link in the show notes for that right now. And honestly, things are getting back to normal to some extent. And it's kind of nice to be with people in person and actually talk to them after a session and not just press hang up. So if you're interested, definitely check out some of the in-person events that are coming up soon.
Whenever I'm done with a presentation, I turn off all the lights and I just put my head down and just unwind.
I was waiting for you to just like sign off or something, but
well, I thought this was a great episode.
Yeah, it was a lengthy one, but it was really good. That was a good post that they had out there for us to kind of digest and talk through some of the implications there, because there's some cool stuff that's coming. There's some cool stuff that we already knew was coming, and then we got some insights into some of the new stuff they've been talking about for a while, but we didn't actually see any of the UIs, like perhaps the Outlook One or One Outlook, whatever the heck that thing is called.
Yeah, and really great questions. Thank you to all of you who joined live to ask these questions. Of course, for those of you who are watching this recorded, you can always ask questions in the chat. We try to keep, or in the comments, we try to keep an eye on those. And don't forget, you can always ask questions before the show actually starts. Matt usually does a pretty good job of scheduling it 3 or 4 days in advance.
Except for this week.
That's fine. Forgive and forget. That's what I always say. You can always jump on or DM us in Twitter or whatever. Yep. Like however you want to get questions to us, we love to answer them. We think that it makes the show better. Yeah, so keep them coming.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much for watching. As always, a like and a subscribe, much appreciated. Leave a comment below to continue the discussion. Sean, thanks so much for joining me this week. Can't wait to hang out with you and everybody again. We'll do this next week.